I'm Jack McDaniel. I'm a father of 4 children. Their names are Scott, Adrian, Galen, and Tasha. They were born in that sequence. I have 16 grandchildren, and they are all ages. They have done well in school, and I'm very proud of all 16. I was born in 1935 in a little town north of where I live now called Calhoun, Georgia. It's in Gordon County. We were poor by today's standards. We lived in the country about 3.5 miles out of town on a dirt road. My dad was Homer McDaniel. My mother was Effie McDaniel. She was a Hice, H-I-C-E, before she married, and she came from a farming family. My father, he was a barber. He did barbering 6 days a week. He cut hair, shaved, and all the things that barbers do. And he walked to work most days, the 3 miles, and he walked home in the evening. I don't know how he got home when it was raining and snowing and cold and blustery, but he managed to get back and forth, and so it was quite a chore, I'm sure. We lived in an old house that was not very well built, very little bit of insulation. There was no heat to speak of, a little bit of fireplace with some limited wood, and we were cold most of the time in the winter. We had beds that were warm with quilts. It had outdoor bathrooms, we called those outhouses, and we had a well that we drew water from out of the ground, and we had a bucket of water that sat on a little table near the back door, and you could dip you a drink of water with a dipper. Those were typical of country people who were poor, and that's the way I came up. And I grew up in those first years living in that old house until I was 6 years old. When I was young, we had what was called a rolling store, and it had typical things that a rural family would need in that truck. And that truck came around about every 3 or 4 weeks, and you could see things that you might need without having to go to town. But we could go up in this truck and we could select school supplies, notebook paper, tablets, pencils. Now, if you needed some extra food, there were canned goods, and if you needed some fresh food, you could select from a rabbit or a chicken that were in cages on the back, and they call those cages coops. And if you wanted to trade in something that you had caught, like a squirrel or a rabbit, you could trade that for a chicken, or you could trade a chicken in for a rabbit or maybe something else. So it was a ready-made supermarket on wheels. They didn't have Cokes in the cans back in those days. They had bottled Cokes, but those kind of things were not as plentiful as they are today. Very few children were able to get a Coke in those days. You just didn't afford Cokes. They weren't, that was a luxury item. And so later on, when I became a teenager, so that we could walk to the store ourselves, we could buy a Coke or a double cola or a Pepsi, and we could buy a bag of peanuts. A bag of peanuts was a nickel. A Coke was a nickel. A Pepsi was a nickel. So now one drink that was a little bit substandard in size, was a little smaller than the Cokes, was a grape, and that little drink was a delicacy. It was called a grape-ette. A grape-ette. Grape-ettes were one of my favorites, but it was smaller than a Coke. It was a very delicate little grape drink. It was actually available until I was probably 8 or 10, and then new grape took its place on the market, and grape-ette was not seen anymore. Around 1941, I was 6 years old, and my mother and another lady decided to take me and another child that was my same age, get us started in Bellwood School. Bellwood was a 11-year school that went all the way from first grade all the way through 11 grades. That was the end of high school in that day. So they took us to Bellwood School, and we started. We had one principal who was principal over all of the years, first grade right on through 11. He was very, very stern, a big man, had big hands, and a big paddle with holes in it. Now, I went there through the 5th grade, and so in the 5th grade, my mother decided that she better get me in a better school, so she changed me to the city schools. That was Calhoun Elementary School, and so she changed me over into that, and I went to the elementary school in town for beginning there, and that was put me on the track to go all the way through the 11th grade. Now, when I went to the high school at Calhoun, I went along with all the other students. I took the normal things like algebra, English, literature, and all the other things in those first few years in high school. That's 8th and 9th grade. And I was about like all the other students, except I didn't feel like I was accepted because I was from out of town, and so being out of town, I didn't have many friends up in the city school. So I decided that I needed to do something for acceptance, and so I decided to play baseball. Well, I made a flop out of baseball. I played it, but I wasn't very good at it. Then I decided to play football. I played 2 years of football in high school, Calhoun High School. The first year that I played high school football, our team, I say we went to made regional champions. That meant that we were able to beat all the other teams that were in our region, and we won the state championship that year. And of course, we felt very, very good, and that was a memorable occasion, and that lasted for about 40 years. There was not another Calhoun team that had that honor of winning the state championship. When I was 16, there was a revival of the Baptist people in my town in Calhoun. And so when that was concluded, there was such a big outpouring of response in this community that the leadership in that church group decided to start a church, and they formed a church called Belmont Baptist Church. And so they asked everybody that wanted to be a member to come and join into that, and those that were on the outside that wanted to become members to be baptized and so forth. So I felt like I had become convicted of the decision that I needed to make, and so I decided to be baptized, and so I was. And there was a group of us that were baptized in a lake that was not far from that, I guess about 10 miles away. It's called Nelson's Lake. In later years, I was baptized again at U Harley in an effort to be more committed to the decision that I had made. The scriptures say that you need to be, that Jesus needs to be Lord of your life, and I've attempted to make him Lord of my life in all phases. And so that's what I've done as far as my faith and commitment. I graduated from Calhoun High School in the spring of 1953. My mother had always wanted me to go to college, but we didn't have any means to do that, and she didn't have any money, and my dad was uninterested in going to college for me. My brother was going to night school in Atlanta, so he said to my mother, why don't you let him come down and go to Georgia State with me? And so we did that. In the evening, I would go to Georgia State. Now, Georgia State in that day was in an old parking warehouse or a parking garage in Atlanta, and it was like a parking garage with ramps from one floor to another, and they had put plywood all the way around that floor, and made school classrooms on each floor of that parking garage. And so we as students would walk from floor to floor, walk right up the ramps from one class to another, and we would have classes on the various floors. And pretty soon after I started to Georgia State, within I'd say 4 months or so, my brother informed me that I need to pack my bags and find me a new place to stay instead of his house. So I went back to Atlanta and found me a boarding house. When I finished college at Georgia State, I had gone to school for 5.5 years, and so I had worked at General Foods all of that time, and I was really worn out with Georgia State, and I was worn out with General Foods. So when I finished school, my next step was to start looking for some work. And so I began to look in the newspaper and anywhere I could to see what was available. And so I answered an ad from Phillips Petroleum. We know Phillips Petroleum as Phillips 66 Oil Company here in Georgia. Phillips operated service stations throughout Georgia and other states and on into the southeast and to Texas and into Louisiana and into Alabama and so forth. But I went to work for Phillips, and we were able to take advantage of their extensive training, and so I trained for about a year and a half. Eventually, when that was finished, they decided to send me to a special job in Mobile, Alabama. On the weekend, I went to church at a local Baptist church, and that's when I saw Frances. She was there at that church, and so I met her, and so that started us to doing a little dating. She was a school teacher, and I was a trainee for Phillips 66, and so we went out together a few times in Mobile. She was there living with her sister and doing a little substitute school teaching work, and so we got to know each other very casually in Mobile. And I didn't stay very long in Mobile, 3 or 4 months, and that's about the extent of my acquaintance with Frances. And so they sent me on to Houston, Texas. Well, I left Frances in Mobile and I went on to Houston, Texas. When Phillips transferred me to Houston, the big boss in the Houston office informed me that I would be working in Waco. Waco was about 100 miles north of Houston, and so I started working there, and I was under another young guy that had been ahead of me by a few years, 2 or 3 years, and he was my supervisor. I did not realize that he was sending reports on me constantly to the office in Houston, but he was, and As it turned out, he was sending negative reports about everything that I was doing or not doing. We did not get along extremely well. He noticed every little thing that I did wrong or that he didn't agree with. And so I know on one holiday weekend, I took a long weekend and I went to Liberty, Mississippi, was where Frances' folks were, and she had gone home from Mobile to Liberty and taken a long weekend, and so I took a long weekend and met her there, and we had a long weekend together, and she introduced me to all of her folks, her family, her mother and father, and her sisters and brothers, and all of that. Well, they immediately jumped to conclusions that I was just the magic one that she had discovered. And so the long weekend I had taken a little extra day or some extra time in getting back to Waco from Liberty, and that guy that was my supervisor, he gave me some more bad reports over that and so forth. I didn't realize all that. So one weekend, one Friday, a few months later, he told me that I needed to be in the Houston office on Monday morning to talk to the big boss that was in charge of that division. And so I said, okay, I'll be there. And so on the weekend, I went back to Houston. When I walked in the office at 8 a.m., I thought I was going to get a promotion. When I went into the office, the big boss said, "Mr. McDaniel, you're not working out very good up in Waco. I need you to go out there to that first desk and get a pad of paper and a pen and write me a letter of resignation." I thought, well, a letter of resignation? I'm 800 miles from home, from Atlanta, Georgia, and you're wanting me to write a letter of resignation. So I said, okay, I'll do whatever you say. And so I did what he said. I mean, that was a short interview if I ever had one. Well, I just happened to have my mother in the car with me that morning, so she was sitting in the waiting room at Phillips Petroleum, Houston, Texas, and I was in the big boss's office, so I had to come out of the office where I had interviewed him and tell her that I was fired 800 miles away from home, and that I was going to get in the car, and she was going to get in the car with me, and we were going to go toward Atlanta, Georgia. We drove all day that day, and that night we were able to get to New Orleans, and that was as far as we could go that day. After I was fired in Houston, I sent my mother home on the Greyhound bus. That was about all I could do if I was going to stop in Mobile to see Frances. And so I did stop there for a few days, and eventually I went back to Atlanta. When I stopped at Mobile, I probably if I don't recall every little detail, but we were thinking of being engaged and getting ready to get married in those days. That was around 60 years ago. And so we eventually planned our wedding, and we planned to do it in Liberty, Mississippi. That's where her folks were. All of her relatives were out there, and we eventually had the wedding there on a Sunday morning before Sunday school. I told Francis that we'd sent our money for a tithe to Billy Graham in those days, that particular one, and pretty soon after that we found an apartment and found a job in Atlanta. And so that solved some of that, and we thought that was unique that happened right after we sent the money to Billy Graham. We married in 61, and that was 60 years ago. We are unique in my family and her family. There is no other couple in the family of the Jenkins family, extended family, or immediate family. There's no other couple in the McDaniel family or the Heiss family, extended or otherwise, that has been married 60 years that we know of. And so we think that is very unique for us. In 1975, we moved from Austell, where we had a house and 5 acres. All of our kids were born down there, and they all had a good, solid start, and we had a lot of friends in Austell. After we built the garden shop in 75, we operated the best we knew how. We were ahead of Walmart and Kmart, and we were ahead of just about all of the garden businesses in Cartersville. We thought we had equipped ourselves to make some real money, but it was all pretty much new ideas to the people of Cartersville, and they didn't come and knock on our door like we thought they would come. We tried everything else that we could think of to add to the garden business in order to try to have more products to sell, but none of it worked. So in around 80, a friend of ours from Austell said, "Why don't you try pool supplies?" Well, we said, "We don't know anything about pool supplies." And he said, "Well, we don't either. My wife knows a little bit, but we don't know really anything about it. Why don't you just let me bring you a van full of pool supplies up here from our pool store in Austell and put it on your shelf?" So he did, and we put it on our shelves, and we didn't advertise, we didn't do anything, but people started coming in and buying that stuff, and we didn't even have to advertise it. They'd come in and say, "What is this?" "Swimming pool supplies." And so they started buying it, and we took a cue from that. We decided to decrease the garden business, and so we minimized the garden business and quit buying on it and started buying more and more swimming pool supplies. And we are still in the swimming pool business today. Scott has made a survivor out of it, and he's doing well in the swimming pool business. I want to say to all of my kids and to my grandchildren that you have a great family. The family has always stood for godliness and for going to church and being a family that is concerned about their spiritual upbringing and their spiritual standing with the Lord. And you need to take notice that you need to give your life to the Lord Jesus whenever you get old enough, and you need to always give yourself to Him, and always study your Bible and give your heart to biblical principles. This is a great family, and you need to stand with the principles that you've always known, and stand with your parents that are upholding the word of the Lord from the Holy Scriptures. I'm very grateful that I lived long enough to see all of my grandchildren born, and that they have begun to take on a little maturity, and there's some of the grandchildren that are already reached maturity, that they are children who have applied themselves and who have done well in school, and who have behaved themselves and given themselves to discipline and hard work. And I'm thankful that the children that I've had to be born into this family have all been an honor to me, and I thank you for your respect and love for me all the years that you have been a part of this family. I'm proud of all of you that are children and grandchildren and wives and spouses of husbands of my children. I'm proud of all of you, and I'm proud of all the grandchildren, and I thank you for behaving yourselves and showing respect to me, and I thank you for all of that, and I hope you will always be considerate and proud like you've always been to me, and I thank you for doing a good job in this family.